Lands Bill. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Speaker. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koe, e te whare, inga iwi, inga reo, inga hawe wha, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Good evening, honourable members. The House is in committee on the West Coast Wind-Blown Timber Conservation Lands Bill. The question before the House, or before the committee, is that Part 1 stand part. I call the Honourable Ruth Dyson.
Mr. Chairman, I've just been perusing the supplementary order papers that are attached to this bill, and note that all of them have been made by individual members and tabled directly in the House. There are none that have been made by a select committee, none that have been made as a result of a submission, none that have been made as a result of members of a select committee, probably local government and environment, sitting around and constructively discussing the merits or otherwise of the bill. And that's because this bill hasn't been through a select committee process. The bill debate only started a few hours ago. Not one single member of the public has had the opportunity to make their views known to a select committee, let alone have the select committee consider them and amend the bill. I can't recall a bill that I've been party to at a select committee or as a minister or as a contributing speaker in the debate where there hasn't been some change made by a select committee. It's a really smart part of our process, actually. It's the time that I wish more members of the public would go and listen to, because it's a time when members do engage very well with each other regardless of their party political differences. And that's what could have happened with this bill. That's what should have happened with this bill. We should have, as Labour proposed, as I heard the Green Party propose, we should have had, if the government's so determined to have this bill done and dusted before the House rises at the end of July, we still could have had a truncated select committee process where members of the public could be invited to come and have their say, and members of Parliament would have been better off for it. But we haven't done that. So we've ended up with quite a few supplementary order papers, and I know there's some more on the way. I just want to draw the attention of the House to two. The first one is supplementary order paper number 475 in the name of Moana Maki. She's got quite a few amendments within this one supplementary order paper, but the two that I just want to comment on are those related to Part 1, which is what we're up to in the debate at the moment. The first is in Clause 4, page 2, line 16, and that is to replace the words in the repeal of the Act provision, replace 2019 with 2016. So instead of the 5-year period of the life of this bill, it would compress it into 2 years. That is quite a generous consideration. Actually, it's a lot tighter time frame than would be allowed under the current legislation. The Minister's indicated he's not going to have a bar of it. That's probably because he hasn't had quite enough time to reflect on it, let alone listen to any members of the public have their say, but we're putting it up in good faith anyway. The second amendment that's proposed in that same supplementary order paper from Moana Maki is in relation to Clause 5. It's to ensure that the designated area and the maps that indicate the designated area are actually included as a schedule to the legislation. That's quite straightforward as a procedure. It's not unusual. It's something that offers some security and protection. I suppose the members of the public have lost quite a lot of trust in the Minister and his government over the last little while, and this would give them some reassurance that the comments that have been made in public are ones that will be adhered to because it will be in the law. Mr. Chairman, the next supplementary order paper I just want to comment on is in the name of Green Party member Eugenie Sage, and that's supplementary order 474, and it's in relation to Clause 5. Again, the member has put more than one amendment in the same supplementary order paper. So Clause 5 actually has quite specific changes to the definition of designated area that's made it more restrictive in terms of areas that are covered in terms of the legislation. It's got specific references to conservation parks, to national reserves, to nature reserves and to scenic reserves and wildlife management areas. And I think, again, those are sensible amendments to try and make what would, I think, generally be regarded as a bad bill better. Mr Chairman, the provisions that we're discussing at the moment, Part 1 covers the purpose of the bill. The purpose of the bill is to actually tear to pieces the 27-year agreement that has been in place, Mr Chairman.
The Honourable Ruth Dice.
The 27-year agreement that has been in place between originally Labour and National and then other parties as they came into Parliament to say that the logging of native timber on the west coast, rest of New Zealand as well, but of course particularly on the west coast, isn't something that we support. We ended that practice completely with the Timberlands Agreement in 2000, and this really says, well, we had enough of that. We think that logging on the west coast is okay again. It's very surprising for the current Minister of Conservation to be leading this debate, because I'm not sure that he actually has his heart in it. He has indicated some courage in some of the decisions he's made, which many people, I've put it on the public record that I've supported some of the more courageous decisions he's made in regard to the monorail, in regard to the tunnel, in regard to approving the marine reserve in Akaroa. Those were clear and courageous decisions. He made them through a considered process. But here he is, trampling over a very long-standing agreement. So I don't think that his heart's in it. I don't think he believes in what he's doing. I think it's a cheap political stunt, and I'm really disappointed in the Minister for doing it. So that's the purpose of the Act, is to rip up the protection against logging native timber on the west coast. It's proposed that this bill last for 5 years. There have been, as I indicated, amendments to say that that should be less than that. That should be only 2 years, if at all. There's a lot of definitions that are covered in this part, and then, of course, the Part 1 concludes with the Act binding the Crown. I was very interested in the second reading contributions that were being made. But one thing that really puzzles me, and I guess if the Minister's going to take a call, he might like to address this one question that I have, and that is how is it going to be determined when we have a pile of logs on the back of a truck that they're all windblown? How is that going to be determined? Is every tree going to be checked? We're going to check that they're not doing any felling that isn't permitted? We're just going to risk it? How will we know that any that are on the back of the truck aren't trees that have subsequently fallen down rather than through this cyclone? It's just a nonsense, as the Minister knows. We know there will be cheating of the system, and this is really the start of the slippery slope that I find so frustrating. It's being wrapped up in a parcel that's designed to say we're supporting the West Coast. Well, it's clear from the Minister's rejection and actually Minister Brownlee's attitude in the earlier stages of the debate that parcel of wrapping is absolutely untrue. There is no protection that any increased employment would be going to people who live on the West Coast or people who are from the West Coast. Of course, we like jobs for other people as well, but you have to tell the truth, Minister, when you're presenting an argument to somebody and saying this is because the West Coast has been so badly done by. Yes, they have actually. 1,000 miners have lost their job because of this government's incompetence and lack of oversight into the activities of solid energy. We know the bottom's falling out of the coal market anyway, but those were high-paying skilled jobs that were lost to the coast. And now in this legislation, there's no protection at all that any new jobs that come from here, either in the take of the timber, the transportation of the timber or milling of the timber, let alone any subsequent processing of the sawn logs, would be of advantage to the West Coast. All those amendments are before the House, and I hope over the next couple of hours we're really able to consider them properly. I resent not having this bill been given the opportunity to be presented at a select committee and for the public to have their say. This is a very, very important issue. The changing of the Conservation Act after 27 years, the dismantling of the agreement in timberlands after 14 years, the undermining of the deal that the then government made with the people of the West Coast for their compensation package of $120 million to go into local jobs is all now up in the air. And that was a hard-fought agreement. It was one that has been courageously taken up by the people of the West Coast, and now I bet they're saying, where does this leave us? What does that mean for our future? That is not the way the government should treat hard-working, good New Zealanders. We shouldn't have this legislation rammed through the House under all stages under urgency, and I hope that we get some answers from the questions and some positive response to the SOPs that have been presented.
I call the Honourable Member Moana Maki.
Thank you, Mr Chair, and I have some SOPs in my name on part one of this